3 True Scary Park Horror Stories. Story 1, The Whispering Woods. Sarah had always enjoyed her evening walks through Crescent Park, a small, quiet park tucked away in the outskirts of town. It was a haven of tranquility, with towering trees, chirping birds, and meandering paths. However, on this particular evening, something felt off. As she strolled down her usual path, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the grass. The air grew cooler, and the park seemed unusually quiet. The usual rustling of leaves was replaced by an eerie stillness, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She checked her phone. It was only 6:45 p.m., not late enough for this kind of unnerving quiet. Suddenly, Sarah heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the wind. She stopped and looked around, but there was no one in sight. Shrugging it off, she continued walking. But the whisper returned, this time louder, more distinct. It seemed to be calling her name. Sarah, her heart skipped a beat. How could anyone know her name? She turned around, scanning the park, but it was empty. The whisper came again, this time from the thick cluster of trees to her right. She strained her eyes, peering into the darkness, but saw nothing. The park's comforting ambience had shifted into something far more sinister. Suddenly, she felt a cold breeze brush against her neck, followed by a soft giggle. Her breath hitched, and she broke into a run, heading toward the park's exit. But the path seemed longer than usual, the trees taller and more oppressive. No matter how fast she ran, the exit remained just out of reach. The whispers were closer now, louder, as if the trees themselves were speaking to her. Just as panic began to set in, Sarah tripped over a root and tumbled to the ground. As she scrambled to get up, she caught a glimpse of something, out of the corner of her eye, dark figures, standing between the trees, watching her. She couldn't make out their faces, but they were tall, unnaturally so, with long, crooked limbs that seemed to blend into the shadows. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she grabbed it, desperate for any sense of normalcy. The screen displayed a message from an unknown number. Don, T looked back. Terror gripped her. With trembling hands, she got to her feet and ran, ignoring the shadows closing in around her. She didn't dare look back. When she finally burst through the park gates, she collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for breath. She never went back to Crescent Park again. But sometimes, when she walked past, she could still hear faint whispering of her name, carried on the wind. Story 2, The Playground at Midnight. Jake and his friends, Mike and Leah, were bored on a Friday night, and decided to head to Elmwood Park. Known for its large playground and creepy urban legends, it seemed like the perfect spot to hang out, and maybe scare each other with ghost stories. What they didn't expect was to experience one firsthand. By the time they arrived, the park was deserted, as it often was after dark. The playground sat eerily still under the dim glow of a single street lamp. The swings, which usually swayed in the wind, hung motionless, and the jungle gym cast long, distorted shadows on the ground. I heard this place is haunted, Mike said with a grin, hopping onto one of the swings. Yeah, I've heard it all before, Lee replied, rolling her eyes. Supposedly a kid disappeared here years ago. Jake shivered, though he wasn't too if it was because of the story, or the sudden drop in temperature. Let's just hang out for a bit, and then lines leave. I don't want to mess with whatever's here. They sat on the swings, talking and laughing, when Jake noticed something strange. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement on the jungle gym. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but when he looked directly at it, he saw a small figure, standing perfectly still at the top of the slide. Guys, look, he whispered. Mike and Leah turned to where he was pointing. The top of the slide was a child, or at least what looked like one. Its face was pale, almost ghostly white, and its eyes were wide, staring directly at them. The three friends froze, unsure of what to do. The child didn't move. Is that a kid? Leah asked, her voice trembling. Should we go check it out? Mike suggested, though his voice lacked confidence. Jake shook his head. No way. Something's wrong. As if on cue, the figure began to move, slowly, methodically, climbing down the slide, though it never took its eyes off them. The way it moved was unnatural, almost mechanical, as if it wasn't walking but being pulled along by invisible strings. Panic set in, and they bolted for the exit. But as they ran, Jake made the mistake of glancing back. The figure was now standing on the ground, closer than before, still watching them. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, more figures were emerging from the shadows of the playground, children, or at least things that looked like children. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, and their mouths were open as if screaming, though no sound came out. Jake and his friends didn't stop running until they were back in their car, hearts pounding in their chests. They sped away from Elmwood Park, vowing never to return. But that night, as Jake lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. When he glanced at his window, he saw them, the children, standing outside in the dark, staring up at him with those wide, unblinking eyes. Story 3, The Haunted Lake. It was supposed to be a peaceful day for Tom and his girlfriend, Amy. They had planned a picnic by the lake at Hollow Creek Park, a secluded spot surrounded by dense forest. The lake itself was beautiful, but had a dark reputation. Locals whispered about drownings and strange disappearances over the years. They arrived in the late afternoon, setting up their picnic blanket near the water's edge. The sun was still high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the tranquil lake. They ate, laughed, and enjoyed each other's company, completely oblivious to the dark history surrounding them. As the sun began to set, the lake took on a different atmosphere. The water, once crystal clear, now appeared murky, reflecting the darkening sky. A thick fog began to roll in from the forest, curling around the trees and creeping toward the shore. We should probably head back, Amy suggested, glancing nervously at the encroaching fog. Tom nodded, but as they packed up their things, he noticed something strange, a woman standing on the far side of the lake. She was dressed in a long, flowing white dress, her back turned toward them. At first, he thought she was another visitor, but something about her didn't feel right. She was standing too still, almost like a statue. Hey, look at that, Tom said, pointing her out to Amy. Amy turned, and her face paled. Tom, that's not normal. The woman didn't move, didn't acknowledge them in any way. As the fog thickened, her figure became blurry, almost like it was dissolving into the mist. Let's go, Amy urged, grabbing Tom's arm. They hurriedly gathered their things and started walking toward the park's exit, but the fog was getting thicker, making it hard to see. The path they had come from seemed to twist and turn in ways it hadn't before, and no matter which way they went, they always ended up back at the lake, and each time they returned, the woman was closer. Panic set in. As they realized they were trapped, the fog was suffocating, and the woman was now only a few feet away, though her face was still hidden by the mist. Tom grabbed Amy's hand and they ran, ignoring the twisting paths and overgrown bushes. They didn't care if they were running in the wrong direction, they just needed to get away. Finally, they broke through the trees, and found themselves at the park's entrance. They stumbled out onto the road, gasping for breath. When they looked back, the fog was gone, and the lake was once again calm and serene. But The woman was still there, standing at the water's edge, watching them. They never spoke of what happened that day, but neither of them ever returned to Hollow Creek Park.